As calls for a no-fly zone over Libya are getting louder, the Arab Gulf states have joined many Western countries in their condemnation of the Libyan regime. The GCC foreign ministers say the government has lost legitimacy and have backed calls for a no-fly zone. Has Gaddafi lost another diplomatic battle? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Divi Gopalan. Arab Gulf states have added their voices to mounting international pressure against the Libyan regime. They say Gaddafi's government has already lost its legitimacy. The foreign ministers of the 6 Arab Gulf states met on Thursday in the Saudi capital Riyadh to discuss the ongoing crisis in Libya. They say that the existing Libyan regime is illegitimate and contact should be initiated with the Libyan Rebels National Council. Now, the foreign ministers have also urged the Arab League to take the necessary measures to stop the bloodshed in Libya. The Arab Gulf Council's countries have already backed a no-fly zone over Libya earlier this week. So let's have a look at what the Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Hamad bin Jaber Al Thani had to say regarding the GCC stance on the no-fly zone and the new National Libyan Council.
The regime has lost its legitimacy. We support the no-fly zone. We also support contact with the National Council in Libya. It is time to discuss this situation with them, and the Security Council should shoulder its responsibility. It is important to impose the no-fly zone. The GCC already announced this, but I think there should be international support.
Well, meanwhile, Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi's most prominent son, Saif al-Islam, said on a TV interview that Libya is preparing full-scale military action to crush the rebellion. He also said they will not surrender even if Western powers intervene in the conflict.
If they want to support the militia, do it. But I will tell you from now, you're going to lose. We will win. And we're not afraid.
Well, to discuss our topic with our 3 guests here in our studio in Doha, Salman Sheikh, he's the director of the Brookings Center in Doha. In London, Con Coughlin, the executive foreign editor of the Daily Telegraph. And we have over the phone from Jeddah, Hossein Shabokshi. He's a columnist at Ashraq Al-Awsat newspaper. Welcome to the program, gentlemen. I want to first start with this idea that Muammar Gaddafi's son is saying that they are going to crush any kind of rebellion, and it is very likely given that the rebels have minimal firepower and they are being described as a ragtag army. How important is international intervention? And if I can put this first to you, Salman Sheikh, on how credible or possible a no-fly zone is.
Yes, thank you for having me. I think international intervention, further international intervention, after the Security Council has already spoken in its resolution 1970, is absolutely critical now. What we are really talking about here is momentum. Right now, the momentum on the ground has swayed back to Gaddafi and his illegitimate regime, away from the Libyan people. The other pillar for momentum is the international community. And I actually do believe, with Gaddafi promising and now proving with bombings in towns such as Ras al-Nuf, as well as Zawiya and others, I do believe that this is the time now to draw a line in the sand and for the international community to say, no more flying your aircraft to bomb innocent civilians. Otherwise, I fear, we are going to have a continuation of this and a bloodbath. So, an international no-fly zone is possible. 3 triggers have been presented. The situation on the ground merits it. We have now broad international and regional support. The GCC is a clear example of that, and I believe we will also have the League of Arab States coming out very strongly. Now is the time to enforce a no-fly zone, which is practical, which also involves perhaps Arab states. I believe that is also possible. I think Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt provide very good military hardware that could be part of that. And the air defences and the much vaunted air force of the Libyans is really something that a broad international coalition can take on and silence rather quickly.
Con Coughlin, how much should the international community be intervening and how much should Western powers be involved in this situation, especially with regards to military and a no-fly zone?
Well, hello, Divya. and thanks for having me on the show. My concern with all this is that if we're not careful, we're going to be sleepwalking into another Iraq-style situation. Remember, the West's and the Arab world's confrontation with Saddam Hussein started with the imposition of a no-fly zone. And over years, the whole situation escalated to the point where it became an open military confrontation. And I can see this happening with Libya, because it's all very well talking about the establishment of a no-fly zone, but what happens when Gaddafi, as he's promised he will, retaliates? When he starts to take hostages, when he attacks Western assets and other assets in his country, then the same people who are calling for the no-fly zone will be obliged to send in troops, and we'll have a ground invasion. And very quickly this could escalate out of control. So, I'm very wary of these calls for a no-fly zone. At the moment, we have the application of what we call in the West soft power, freezing the assets of the Gaddafi family and their supporters, imposing sanctions, containing the activities of the Gaddafi family. And I think we need to have a good, long, hard look at how effective they can be before we go any further.
Hussein Shabokshki, if I can bring you in, you're on the phone to us from Jeddah. As in that same vein, should the Western powers just be pushing soft diplomacy or soft power? And should the Arab states be taking responsibility? They have the cash, they have the military hardware. Why don't they step in unilaterally?
Well, it's about inconsistency. The West has sold us the idea about a new paradigm, about a new moral paradigm that started with Iraq and not allowing its dictator to attack his people in Kurdistan and the south with the Shia. We thought there was a new manual, there was a new set of rules in the area. There will be a new set of rules that will apply to everybody. We obviously did not see that applied to Israel when it attacked and massacred the Palestinians in Gaza. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that applied today and being, going in circles around the real issue, massacring people, innocent civilians in Libya, under what can be classified as very silly and trivial.
So what are you calling for?
Nations. We are calling for an international stand. We all know that the application of a no-fly zone can only be done under an international coverage through the Security Council and applied through NATO. We all know this, and that's the only method. We know it cannot be done by the Arab League nor by the Arab states. So if we want to apply it, we know what it needs to be done. Unfortunately, there is no political will around that.
So, Salman Sheikh, how would it work? How would a no-fly zone work in this case if it does involve Western powers?
Well, let me say, first of all, that the escalation that Con is talking about is already happening. At some stage, I suspect that, especially because Gaddafi is not going to back down, and certainly the Libyan people are not going to back down, because they'll only be killed or put into a very, very difficult situation. So in the days and weeks ahead, if we do nothing, we are going to have a massive loss of life, which is going to lead to greater calls for intervention. Also, I think the Iraq analogy is wrong, because we went into Iraq not fulfilling the three conditions, the pathway to international action, and specifically a no-fly zone, that we need. We didn't have a legal UN mandate, we didn't have broad international and regional support, and we didn't have the trigger. We didn't find the weapons of mass destruction. So how would such a no-fly zone work now? I actually believe that if we look at the map, what we're really talking about enforcing in the first instance is a no-fly zone in the triangle between Tripoli, Sirte and Sheba in the south. That is the main area over which we would have to have a coalition aircraft, NATO, and perhaps, as I said, also Arab nation aircraft, a part of a coalition enforcing the no-fly zone. Also bear in mind, we're talking about 200 aircraft, okay, on the Libyan side, but most of them are aging Soviet-era aircraft. And the Su-22 and others, and the MiGs that they have, as well as the combat helicopters, are no match for the F-16s, the F-15S, as well as some of the other Apache and other hardware that such a powerful international
regardless of
have.
the hardware, it does amount to war, though. Once you have international intervention, once you bring in international hardware, this is war, essentially.
I mean, it will be war in that they will have to initially take action, as Secretary Gates has said, and they will have to enforce the no-fly zone. But as I said, I think that they can control the air, and this is not just me, where we're hearing from military analysts, in perhaps less than a week. So yes, then there will be the question of trying to enforce further measures if they're necessary. But what alternatives do we have? Does anybody else have alternatives? The soft power has been is an important signal. As I said, Resolution 1970 is an important one. It is an important one. The ICC referral, the travel ban, the asset ban, all the rest of it. But frankly, it's not working, and it won't work in the next few weeks. Number one in Security Council Resolution 1970 was that the Libyan regime would stop all hostile actions and violations of this particular resolution. Well, that's not happening. Instead, what we're seeing is an escalation. And further to the east, the people in Benghazi and other places are not going to back down, because otherwise they know their fate. So this is why we need to wrest back the momentum. We need to take the diplomatic initiative and get this resolution passed, which includes within it a no-fly zone.
Okay, so let's look at the discussions surrounding this no-fly zone and surrounding what the international community should do. They are meeting, they're talking, EU states are talking about how they should approach this, and there is disjoint in all of this. Con Coughlin, do you really think that there is appetite to go in there and take responsibility now for another country? And do you think that there's enough unity within the EU itself to be able to come up with a decision that everyone stands by?
Yeah, well, again, I have to take issue with what Sheikh Salman was just saying there. And I think there's a degree of hypocrisy in the approach of the Arab world to this issue. I mean, a lot of the Arab states who were very critical of the West for getting rid of Saddam Hussein, another dictator who oppressed his people, are now calling for the West to do the same with Gaddafi. And listening to Sheikh Salman talking about the aging Soviet aircraft, I remember 20 years ago, people talking about the aging Soviet aircraft that Saddam Hussein had. So this is analogous. And when you talk about there not being Security Council support for the war in Iraq, neither is there Security Council support for a no-fly zone against Libya. And the international community is already fracturing. You have France recognising the National Council against the wishes of its other European partners. There are splits in Washington between the White House and Hillary Clinton over the best form of action to take. And then you have the GCC and the Arab League trying to work out their position. You know, there are a lot of Arab countries with a lot of firepower. The Saudi Royal Air Force has as much nearly as many Typhoon interceptors as the RAF in Britain. And as somebody mentioned earlier, the Egyptian Air Force is also very powerful. The Arabs have it in their gift to take their own action to intervene if they deem the government of Muammar Gaddafi to be illegitimate. So when I look at the international response, not just the Western response, I see many divisions appearing already before the first aircraft has even intercepted Libyan airspace. And as I said earlier, I think we have to be very, very careful about imposing our will on a sovereign nation like Libya. We had got into enough trouble in Iraq. And Saddam was already in breach of 13 Security Council resolutions by the time the ground forces invaded. If we go into Libya without a single UN Security Council resolution authorising force, the West and its allies will be in deep trouble.
So, Salman Sheikh, should the Arab countries be taking more responsibility? Should they have the power to act quickly, and before many more lives are lost, should they not step in and basically take control of the situation?
Don't get me wrong here. First and foremost, I would agree that we need a UN Security Council resolution. I do believe that we can build a broad coalition which includes NATO and Western countries as well as Arab states, as we did the time of Saddam. And by the way, the analogy again with Saddam and the Second Gulf War is wrong, because the Arab people were not behind that. I think you'll find that most Arabs will be scratching their heads right now and wondering, why isn't the international community going further and stopping Gaddafi and his air force bombing innocent civilians? So, but let me say again, and I do believe that a UN Security Council resolution authorizing a no-fly zone is possible. Libya presents a very keen and severe test of the new international order. The UN Security Council is representative of that new international order. It not only includes France and Britain and the United States, but it also includes Germany, it also includes India, it also includes Brazil, as well as, of course, China and Russia. And I do actually believe that through some hard negotiation, as we did just a couple of weeks ago with Resolution 1970, I do believe that we have the basis, we have the situation on the ground, we have broad regional international support, despite what Con is saying. The Arabs are actually speaking more or less with one voice on this. And so I do believe that we also have the international coalition which can provide the legal mandate that we do need for such action. I think to go in without it would be wrong. And that is the lesson, of course, that we do learn from Iraq. But I actually believe it's possible.
Con Coughlin, I believe you had something to add.
Well, I was just going to take issue with Salman Sheikh's assertion that it is possible to get a Security Council resolution on Libya when the Russians have made it quite clear that they're against a no-fly zone, and the Chinese are also opposed to such a motion. So when you've got two of the major powers already stating their opposition, I think it's very difficult to see this happening. And coming back to Iraq, of course, you know, the Arab states were foursquare behind the Allies when we put a coalition together to get rid of Saddam out of Kuwait. And again, coming back to the issue of Arab unity, I mean, do we really expect the Saudi Arabian government, which is facing its own difficulties from anti-government protests, to support the rebels in Libya? I mean, that's almost... That would be an indication that the Saudi government is supporting the rebels against its own authority. So I think there are many contradictions here that need to be fleshed out.
Let me bring Hussein Shabakshki in and ask him what his thoughts on this. Basically, there seems to be two sides on whether the West should be intervening. Do you think there is appetite in Libya itself, or for the people on the ground, to have the West come in? Or do you think this could end up a situation like Iraq?
Well, I think I can't help but smile and almost laugh when I hear all the big deal that is made about United Nations resolutions. Israel has licked all the United Nations resolutions and got away with murder. So I don't think we should make such a big deal about UN resolutions. Iraq was a war that had no case, and yet the West managed to market and sell it and get it accepted, and it invaded Iraq under no legitimate reason. There were no weapons of mass destruction, and Al-Qaeda surely was not there. Here, the Libyans are screaming. They are being massacred. There is an international community acceptance to a strike against the Libyan presence in some areas. The Saudis cannot do this on their own. They don't have aircraft carriers to carry Typhoon hits on anywhere in Libya. It's simply too far physically to be carried out by the Saudis. The Egyptians cannot do that because they have their own incomplete revolution that they need to take care of. So the only logistically prepared and systematically ready force that can exercise this option is NATO, and they are in striking distance. The argument for a legitimate operation is there morally and politically. The only fear that I can see it carrying out is the difference of opinion between some of its members. I don't think there is a disagreement on the principle, but it's the how and the when.
That brings me to the the principle of motivations. What is motivating these countries to step in? I mean, especially with the Gulf states, why are they so adamantly insisting that Muammar Gaddafi leave? I mean, given that this could affect them personally, especially these regimes who are seeing their own kind of rebellion.
We're comparing here apples to oranges, frankly. I think the Gaddafi regime on a personal level has had a very bitter relationship with the Saudis and with the Kuwaitis and with the Qataris. There are personal problems between the two regimes. It's not a secret. Furthermore, there is the humanitarian side of things. The Libyans are suffering. They have appealed to these governments and to the peoples of these governments to help them get rid of this regime. And it is no longer a secret that the GCC countries have aligned themselves behind the people of Libya and not behind the regime. So there is a moral stand that is being taken now, not very different from the French, for example. These people have had the guts and have had the moral courage to frankly talk the talk for the moment, and I'm sure they're going to be following it up with walking the walk. They at least have put the words on the table instead of beating around the bush.
Salman Sheikh, what do you think the motivations are for this?
No, I would agree with what your guest just said there. There is no love lost between the Gulf states and Gaddafi over a number of years. They've also tried to offer humanitarian assistance in the last couple of weeks, and they've been rebuffed quite strongly. I think also, though, they are recognizing that the Arab world is united in getting rid of Gaddafi, and their view only, I think, closely mirrors that. And so I think we're in a situation where actually the Gulf leaderships are further ahead than perhaps those in the West. I would also say that their role, as well as that of the Arab League, I think will have a decisive impact in terms of the moves in the UN Security Council. What Con was just saying was stuff that we were hearing before the last resolution, to be honest with you. And yet when they saw the extent of what was coming from the GCC and the Arab League in particular in terms of statements, China and Russia were forced to back down. I believe that the continuing efforts of the Arab League and the GCC will actually have a very important impact on the debates in the United Nations in New York, and will help in terms of focusing minds as to what should we do and what should we do next. And in that respect, I do believe that we will be on our way towards a serious Security Council resolution which will endorse a no-fly zone. I don't believe this is just a responsibility of the United States. I do believe that this should be a NATO effort, but again, I do believe, even if it's only token assistance and participation, the Arab states should take part.
So, Con Coughlin, given your resistance to this no-fly zone, what do you think should happen?
Well, as I said earlier, I think we need to try and use as much influence as we can to isolate the Gaddafi regime, to make life difficult for the Gaddafi regime. Here in London, we've seized already billions of pounds worth of Gaddafi's assets. I think a lot of more work can be done on this throughout the West and throughout the Arab world. I think we need to provide as much support as we can, diplomatically and other means, for the rebels. And I think we need to, as I say, keep a sober judgment. I must say, I find it quite ludicrous that people who opposed the war in Iraq because it didn't have Security Council backing, and oppose whatever Israel does because it doesn't have Security Council backing, then say we should not worry about Security Council backing for taking action against Libya. If any of the lessons of recent years are to be learned, it is that we need to have international sanction for such action. So I think we need to go to the UN. I'm a lot more sceptical than Salman Sheikh about the likelihood of the UN Security Council backing military intervention in Libya. That's what a no-fly zone is. But let's wait and see.
This has been a very interesting discussion, and it's been really good to get all your views. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Salman Sheikh, Con Coughlin, and Hussein Shabokshi. It's been good to have you talk to us on this edition of Inside Story. We, of course, welcome your comments and suggestions, and you can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye.